Have you ever stopped to think why Jesus, the Son of God, needed to pray so much? If he was perfect, if he had all the power of heaven and earth, why did he spend hours, days, in isolated places, seeking the Father in prayer? What happened in these secret moments between the Son and the Father? There is a shocking secret hidden in Jesus' time of prayer, a secret that can completely revolutionize your spiritual life. Stay until the end, because what you are going to hear today could be the turning point between a lukewarm faith and a real and deep relationship with God. Was Jesus' time of prayer more than just a religious practice? Perhaps you imagine that Jesus' prayer was just a time to ask, to give thanks, or to seek something from God. But what if I told you that Jesus' time of prayer carried a profound mystery, a secret that could completely transform your spiritual life? The truth is that Jesus' time of prayer was not just a formality or an obligation, but a vital necessity for him to fulfill the mission that the Father entrusted to him. In his moments of prayer, Jesus not only sought strength to face challenges or difficulties, but he completely surrendered himself to the will of the Father. He knew that without this intimacy, without this constant contact with the Creator, his ministry would be empty and powerless. Now, the question that remains is, have you dedicated yourself to prayer time in the way that Jesus did? It is more than just praying for the sake of praying. Jesus knew that prayer was the place where he aligned himself with the will of the Father, where he received strength and spiritual renewal to fulfill his purpose. This video will take you on a journey to understand the true meaning of Jesus' time of prayer. Throughout this reflection, you will see how Jesus' prayer not only reveals the secret of his own life, but also offers a model of intimacy with God that can transform your Christian walk. Are you ready to discover what Jesus really did in these silent moments with the Father? Let us follow and understand the mystery of Jesus' prayer, a mystery that can change your life. When we think about the life of Jesus, we often focus on the great works he performed, healing the sick, performing miracles, preaching the kingdom of God. But if we look more closely, we will see that behind every great act of Jesus, there was something fundamental that he never neglected: his life of prayer. For Jesus, prayer was not an option, it was an absolute priority. In several passages of the Gospel, we see Jesus withdrawing to pray. He knew that without a constant connection with the Father, he could not fully fulfill his mission. Prayer was not just a habit, but a vital necessity, like the air he breathed. In the Gospel of Luke, for example, we see that Jesus often withdrew to solitary places, where he dedicated himself to prayer, Luke 5 verse 16. He knew that in order to live with purpose and fulfill God's plan, he needed to hear the Father's voice and be renewed in his presence. This is a crucial teaching for us Christians. We live in a world full of distractions, where the temptation is always to postpone prayer or replace it with activities that seem more urgent. But Jesus teaches us, by his example, that prayer should be our daily priority. It is not something to be done only in times of crisis or difficulty, but something that should be cultivated every day, in all circumstances. Imagine this: if the Son of God himself, being perfect and without sin, felt the need to pray, how much more do we, with our limitations and weaknesses, need to dedicate time to seeking God's face? If Jesus prayed to remain aligned with the Father, how much more should we, imperfect human beings, follow his example? Now, look at your own life. Has prayer been a priority for you? Let's reflect on how we can imitate Jesus' dedication and place prayer at the center of our Christian journey. When Jesus withdrew to pray, it was not just a moment of silence or a spiritual routine. Each time he stepped away from the crowd to be with the Father, something powerful and profound happened. Jesus' prayer was a sacred space where he connected with the heart of God, receiving direction, renewal, and strengthening his resolve to fulfill his divine mission. One of Jesus' most memorable moments of prayer is the episode in the Garden of Gethsemane, before his arrest. In Matthew 26 verse 39, we see Jesus falling on his face in agony and praying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Here we see a prayer of surrender, a total surrender to God's will, even in the face of imminent pain and suffering. Jesus, being fully God, knew what awaited him, but his prayer was not to avoid the cross. It was a prayer of trust, saying to the Father, "I trust your plan, even when I do not fully understand it." These moments of prayer reveal something profound about the nature of the relationship between Jesus and the Father. He did not pray simply to ask for something for himself. Instead, he prayed to align his will with God's, always seeking to fulfill the Father's purposes. And this, brothers and sisters, is something we all need to learn. Often in our prayers, we ask God to change our situation, to ease our pain, but we forget that often prayer is also a surrender, an acceptance of God's will, even when it seems difficult or challenging. In addition, Jesus' prayer also shows us something important about how we should pray. Jesus did not pray mechanically or superficially. His moments of prayer were intense and sincere. He knew that his mission depended on this connection with the Father. He sought strength and direction, and it was in these moments of intimacy with God that he renewed his mission. Have you ever stopped to think that when we pray, what are we really seeking? Are we simply asking for something to ease our suffering, or are we seeking to align our lives with God's will, as Jesus did? Jesus' prayer teaches us that often what we need is not a change in circumstances, but a change in our hearts, which only happens when we are willing to seek what God wants for us. The deepest secret of Jesus' prayer lies in his total dependence on the Father. When Jesus prayed, he was not simply communicating his needs or making requests. He was expressing an absolute dependence on God to accomplish his mission on earth. This dependence was not because Jesus needed help to fulfill his divine nature, but because, as a human being, he chose to live in total submission to the will of the Father. Jesus' prayer reveals a fundamental pattern for the Christian life. Our prayer must be marked by dependence on God. In John 5 verse 19, Jesus declares, "Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father doing. For whatever he does, these the Son does likewise." Jesus, even as the Son of God, recognized that his mission on earth was not to be accomplished in his own strength or wisdom. He needed the Father at every step. He knew that in order to accomplish the divine plan, he must be in constant harmony with God. This is a principle that many of us forget. We live in a society that values independence and self-sufficiency. We are taught from an early age to do it ourselves and not depend on anyone. But the truth that Jesus teaches us through his prayer life is exactly the opposite. True strength comes from dependence on God. Jesus' prayer was an expression of this dependence. When he withdrew to pray, he was not only seeking answers to the challenges of his ministry, he was seeking, above all, a deep alignment with the Father. In his prayer, Jesus surrendered himself to the Father and trusted in his wisdom, his power, and his plan. This is clear in the prayer that Jesus makes in John 17, where he intercedes for his disciples, committing them to the Father and seeking his protection and direction. Jesus' example challenges us to look at our own prayer life. Are we praying only when we need something specific, or are we seeking, every day, to align ourselves with God's will? Are we willing to acknowledge our total dependence on God and seek his guidance in every area of our lives? If Jesus, being God, depended on the Father to fulfill his ministry, how much more do we, who are human and imperfect, need that same dependence? Jesus' prayer teaches us that true prayer is not just about asking. It is about surrendering our will, our strength, and our trust to the Father. In our prayer life, dependence on God must be the center. And it is this dependence that gives us the power and direction to live according to God's purposes. When we look at Jesus' times of prayer, we realize something profound. Prayer was not just a routine or a formality, but a place of spiritual renewal. For Jesus, each time he withdrew to pray, he was not only seeking communication with the Father, but also spiritual renewal and strengthening. Prayer was the place where he fueled himself to face life's challenges and fulfill his mission. In Luke 6 verse 12, we see a clear example of this. Before making important decisions, such as choosing the 12 apostles, Jesus spent the night in prayer. Prayer was not a superficial act. It was a time of intense searching and renewal. He knew that in order to make decisions that had an eternal impact, he needed to be completely aligned with God's will. In this sense, prayer was the place where Jesus recharged himself spiritually, where he prepared himself for the next steps of his ministry. Jesus lived in a constant state of renewal, and this was only possible through prayer. He knew that spiritual strength did not come from his own resources, but from constant connection with the Father. As human beings, we also face times of exhaustion, emotional and spiritual wear and tear. And, just like Jesus, We need times of prayer to renew ourselves and restore our inner strength. It is easy to get lost in the daily demands of life. Work, family responsibilities, personal challenges, and external pressures can quickly drain our energy. In the midst of all this, prayer is often pushed aside, as if it were something secondary. But the truth is that prayer is the necessary fuel for our spiritual life. Without it, we run the risk of living in a state of spiritual exhaustion, without the daily renewal that only God can provide. In Matthew 11 verses 28 to 30, Jesus invites us, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." This invitation is an expression of His mercy, but it is also a revelation of how He desires to renew us. Jesus offers a rest that goes beyond the physical. He offers rest for our souls, a rest that we can only find when we seek His presence in prayer. The secret of Jesus' ministry was not only His miracles and teachings, but His constant spiritual renewal through prayer. Each time He withdrew to pray, He was strengthened, renewed, and replenished. He knew that without this time of intimacy with the Father, His ministry would lose its power and purpose. Prayer, for Jesus, was the place where He found His strength, where He recovered His inner peace, and where His soul was renewed to face the next challenge. And that is what prayer can do for us: renew our spirit, give us the strength to continue our journey, and align us with God's plans for our lives. Have you been making time for prayer as a place of spiritual renewal? In the midst of fatigue and difficulties, have you sought the renewal that can only come from God? Jesus teaches us that prayer is essential to restore our soul and strengthen our faith. One of the greatest lessons we can learn from Jesus' prayer life is consistency. It was not an occasional act or reserved only for times of great need. Jesus had a spiritual routine of prayer that He followed with discipline and devotion. He knew that in order to fulfill the mission that the Father had entrusted to Him, He needed to maintain a constant and uninterrupted prayer life. In Mark 1 verse 35, we see a clear example of this consistency. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, He got up and went out to a solitary place, and there He prayed. This verse reveals something fundamental about Jesus' prayer life. He knew that in order to remain steadfast and strong in His ministry, He needed to dedicate daily time to prayer, regardless of the circumstances. This practice of retiring to pray was not just a habit for Jesus, but an essential part of His life. He did not just pray when He was tired or faced challenges. Jesus prayed constantly, whether at the beginning of the day, as we see here, or throughout His entire ministry. In several passages, the Gospel shows us that He often withdrew to pray, Luke 5 verse 16, Matthew 14 verse 23. Prayer was not something He did only in response to a crisis, but was a fundamental part of His daily routine. For Jesus, prayer was more than a religious practice. It was a spiritual necessity. He did not consider prayer optional, but essential to maintaining His connection with the Father. He knew that without constant prayer, His mission would lose focus, direction, and strength. Now, the big question for us is, have we been consistent in our prayer life? Has our spiritual routine been marked by the regularity that Jesus demonstrated? Consistency in prayer is one of the greatest keys to growing spiritually and remaining firm in our faith. If Jesus, being perfect, dedicated Himself to prayer consistently, how much more should we, who are fragile and dependent, seek this intimacy with God every day? In our Christian walk, we are often tempted to neglect prayer when we are busy or when life seems to be going well. But the truth is, like Jesus, we need to create a prayer routine that is uninterrupted, a daily practice of seeking and communing with the Father. It is in consistency that we find the strength to continue our Christian journey. As we reflect on Jesus' prayer life, we are challenged to examine deeply our own prayer practice. Jesus, the Son of God who lived in total harmony with the Father, set a clear pattern for us of how prayer should be an essential part of our lives. He did not pray merely as a religious duty, but as a daily necessity, a reflection of His total dependence on God. We have seen throughout the chapters that Jesus' prayer was not superficial or occasional. It was an expression of His intimacy with the Father, an ongoing spiritual renewal, and a constant priority in His life. Jesus prayed not just to ask for something, but to align His will with the will of the Father. He prayed to strengthen himself spiritually and to renew his energy and motivation to fulfill his mission. He prayed consistently, demonstrating that prayer is not something to be done only when we are in crisis or need something, but should be a daily habit that nourishes our spiritual life. Now, how can we apply these truths to our own lives? How can we transform prayer into more than just a religious act, but a life-changing experience, just as it was for Jesus? Make prayer a daily priority. Like Jesus, we need to establish prayer as a non-negotiable part of our daily routine. This means setting aside a specific time to pray every day, no matter the circumstances. It could be first thing in the morning, before bed, or any other time that works for you, but the important thing is to be consistent. Don't let the demands of life and daily challenges steal the time you need to seek God's face. Seek spiritual renewal in your prayer. Jesus' prayer was not just a time to ask for things, but to be renewed by the Father. In times of weariness, pain, or uncertainty, it is in prayer that we find spiritual renewal. Have you sought God to restore your spirit? Prayer is not just for times of asking, but a refuge where we find rest and strength to continue our Christian journey. In Matthew 11 verse 28, Jesus invites us, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Trust and dependence on the Father. Prayer is the place where we learn to depend completely on God. Jesus, despite being God, knew that in order to fulfill his mission, he needed the Father. In our lives, we are often tempted to trust in our own strength or abilities, but true strength comes from God. No matter how big or small the challenge, in everything we must turn to the Father in prayer, seeking his guidance, strength, and direction. Cultivate consistency in prayer. The life of Jesus teaches us that prayer must be constant, not intermittent. Sometimes we forget to pray when everything is going well and only remember God when we are in crisis. But, as we have seen, prayer needs to be a constant practice, something we do every day at all times. This keeps us close to God and gives us the strength we need to live faithfully. Prayer as alignment with God's will. Jesus always prayed to align his will with the Father's. This means that prayer is not just about asking or giving thanks, but about being willing to listen and submit to God's will. In our prayers, we must be open to receiving direction from God, even when it challenges our own will. This requires an attitude of humility and surrender. By following Jesus' example, our prayer life is transformed from something mechanical to something profound and transformative. It is not just about asking for blessings or help, but about growing in intimacy with God and being spiritually renewed every day. Today, you have the opportunity to transform your prayer life. Perhaps you already pray regularly, but perhaps prayer has become a mechanical or purposeless task. Or perhaps you have neglected prayer, pressured by life's responsibilities. Whatever it is, now is the time to recommit your prayer practice, to return to Jesus' example, and to seek spiritual renewal in his presence. I invite you to make a decision to prioritize prayer in your life. Dedicate time to being with God every day. Seek renewal and strength in his presence, and allow prayer to become a regular practice in your life. Like Jesus, trust the Father, seek his will, and allow him to renew your soul each day. May your prayer life be more than a ritual. May it be a daily encounter with the living God, a place where you are strengthened, renewed, and aligned with the divine purposes for your life. If this message spoke to you, don't let it get lost in time. Start a new prayer routine today, as Jesus taught us. Choose a time. Set aside a place. Close the door, and talk to the Father. Your spiritual life will never be the same again when you decide to seek God as a priority. With constancy, with hunger, with total surrender. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and share this word with someone who also needs to rediscover the power of prayer. And remember, God still speaks, but it is in secret that he whispers his greatest secrets. See you in the next video, and until then, stay strong, praying without ceasing.